Late January 1945. A narrow forest road outside Saarbrücken lay silent beneath a crust of frozen mud. The war in the West was entering its final convulsions, but on this morning, a column from the Panzer-Lehr-Division halted before a smoking wreck that seemed out of place among the burned-out American vehicles scattered along the verge. Oberleutnant Franz Hoffmann, a 31-year-old maintenance officer, stepped down from his half-track and stared at the tank blocking the track ahead. Its olive-drab paint was scored with shrapnel scars, but its suspension arms and tracks were intact. Across the glacis plate, the faint white star of the United States Army showed through a film of soot. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Hoffmann brushed his gloved hand across the side armor and read the stenciled letters. U.S.A. 30109-235 M4A3E8. He had never seen that final designation before. To him, all Shermans were essentially the same thin-skinned, mass-produced machines whose crews relied on numerical superiority rather than engineering excellence. Yet this one looked different. The road wheels sat lower, spaced evenly, joined by paired horizontal springs rather than the familiar vertical volute system. Its hull lines seemed sleeker, its track wider. A mechanic beside him murmured, "Einami Prototyp vielleicht?" Perhaps an American prototype. Hoffmann shook his head. 9. Series Fertigung. Look at the casting marks. They're producing these by the thousand. He ordered the recovery crew to tow the vehicle back to the division's forward workshop near Kaiserslautern. What neither he nor his men realized was that this captured M4A3E8, nicknamed the Easy 8, by its crews represented a fundamental shift in Allied armor design, one that would quietly undermine the last illusions of German technical superiority. In the winter of 1944, Germany's armored doctrine still rested on the conviction that battlefield supremacy flowed from firepower and armor thickness. The Tiger I, with its 88mm gun and more than 4 inches of frontal armor, embodied that belief. Panzer officers described it as a fortress that moves. But the philosophy came at a cost. Each Tiger required over 300,000 man-hours to build, demanded rail transport for any movement beyond 100 kilometers, and consumed twice the fuel of a Panzer IV. By contrast, American tank doctrine emphasized mobility, reliability, and standardized production. The United States had built over 48,000 Shermans by the end of 1944, each designed to be repaired in the field with interchangeable parts. German engineers dismissed this approach as industrial brute force devoid of sophistication. That assumption had held until Hoffmann's men rolled the new Sherman into their workshop and began taking measurements. The tank's engine deck bore the data plate of the Ford Motor Company, Rouge Plant, Dearborn, Michigan. Inside sat the Ford GAA, a Vate gasoline engine derived from an experimental aircraft design. To Hoffmann's astonishment, it produced 500 horsepower while weighing nearly 1/3 less than the Maybach HL 230 installed in the Panther. But it was the suspension that arrested every eye in the workshop. The label HVSS horizontal volute spring suspension was stamped onto each bogie housing. Unlike earlier Shermans, whose vertical springs limited travel and produced a rocking motion at high speed, the HVSS allowed the road wheels to move independently with a long horizontal spring pack. The result was a smoother ride, lower ground pressure, and an ability to traverse rough terrain that German crews would soon witness firsthand. Hoffmann noted in his logbook, "The American system uses simplicity to achieve performance we pursue through complexity. It is both cheaper and better." He recommended the vehicle be shipped intact to the Kummersdorf Proving Ground near Berlin for formal evaluation, the same facility where, 2 years earlier, German engineers had dissected the captured Sherman War Daddy II. Within days, orders arrived from the Heereswaffenamt. The tank was to be transported by rail, Priority 1. February 1945. At Kummersdorf, engineers from the Versuchsstelle für Panzerkampfwagen prepared their inspection bays. The atmosphere was markedly different from that of 1943. Back then, confidence had filled the halls. Now, Exhaustion and quiet doubt hung in the air. The Reich's industrial heartland lay in ruins, its factories dispersed under constant bombardment. Even so, the engineers remained meticulous. Chief Engineer Dr. Wilhelm Rabe supervised the first teardown. He remembered the earlier American tanks' reliability tests and the uncomfortable conclusions they had drawn. Now, faced with this newer model, he sensed a deepening irony. Even as Germany's armoured divisions disintegrated, the enemy's machines were becoming more refined. Technicians began measuring clearances, weighing components, and recording metallurgical samples. One young draftsman remarked that the bogey units could be removed with ordinary wrenches rather than specialized jigs, something impossible on a Panther or Tiger. Another discovered that each track shoe featured a replaceable rubber block secured by 4 bolts, allowing field repairs without complete disassembly. Rabe wrote in his daily report, "The Americans have perfected maintainability. Every part serves production speed and field replacement. This is not engineering laziness, it is engineering discipline of another kind." Outside the test sheds, the war crept closer each night. Artillery from the Western Front could sometimes be heard as distant rumbles, yet inside, the engineers continued their methodical work, as though understanding this foreign tank might somehow restore their fading sense of professional order. When they finally drove the M4A3E8 onto the Kummersdorf test track, observers lined the embankments. The tank's wide, 23-inch tracks pressed lightly into the frozen soil. Test driver Unteroffizier Karl Mayer advanced through the gears. The Ford GAA responded smoothly, its deep exhaust note echoing across the field. The tank accelerated to nearly 45 km per hour on level ground, extraordinary for a 33-ton vehicle. The suspension absorbed the ruts with a fluid motion none of them had seen before. Where a Panther would have lurched violently, the EZ-8 remained level, its gun barrel steady enough for accurate fire on the move. Rabe's assistant timed the run and recorded vibration readings. They were 1/3 those measured on a Tiger. Later that afternoon, the engineers set up a comparative trial. A Tiger 1, a Panther Ausf, G, and the captured Sherman. The 3 tanks traversed a sloped obstacle course designed to test traction and ride stability. Snow and thawing mud had turned the ground treacherous. The Tiger's interleaved road wheels clogged with mud almost immediately. The Panther fared little better. Its narrow tracks and heavy nose caused frequent bogging. Then came the American machine. The M4A3E8 advanced steadily, its broad tracks distributing weight evenly. The suspension flexed gracefully, and the tank crested the final embankment without wheel slippage. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. One observer, Hauptmann Erich Weiss of the Panzer-Abteilung 507, muttered under his breath, "If our Panthers moved like that, we might still hold the Rhine." Rabe later summarized, "The event, the American tank demonstrated cross-country mobility superior to all domestic designs under current conditions. Particularly notable is its consistent traction in deep mud. The HVSS arrangement appears to eliminate the oscillations common to our torsion bar systems when overloaded." He added a final note in the margin, almost a confession. "We sought invincibility through complexity. They achieved effectiveness through restraint." At that moment, none of the men at Kummersdorf could know that hundreds of EZ-8s were already pouring into Europe through Antwerp, destined for General George S. Patton's Third Army and the newly re-equipped 9th Armored Division. American crews regarded them as a long-awaited answer to the Panther, faster, steadier, and finally able to exploit the Sherman's inherent agility. Field tests conducted in December 1944 at Aberdeen Proving Ground had shown that the HVSS suspension allowed continuous firing on rough terrain with less than half the dispersion of earlier models. This meant that an American gunner could keep his sight picture on target while advancing, something no German crew attempted except on paved roads. The Kummersdorf evaluators learned of these reports through captured technical bulletins. They read them with disbelief. German doctrine emphasized firing from halt, maximizing first shot accuracy from the powerful but slow-traversing 88mm guns. The concept of firing accurately while moving seemed reckless until they saw the stabilized gun sight fitted to the Sherman. The sight, manufactured by the Westinghouse Electric Company, used a gyroscopic vertical stabilizer. It was primitive by post-war standards but revolutionary in 1945. As the tank jolted over uneven ground, the gun remained roughly aligned with the target, buying the crew crucial seconds in combat. When the Kummersdorf technicians demonstrated the mechanism to visiting officers from the Waffen-SS armored branch, one colonel dismissed it as American over-engineering. But the test driver quietly noted that the sight allowed him to place consecutive rounds within a 5-foot grouping at 300 meters while moving performance. That astonished even the skeptics. By mid-March 1945, the engineers compiled their official report, Versuchsbericht NR 2143, titled Beurteilung des amerikanischen Kampfpanzers M4A3E8. It ran 42 pages and contained observations that, though never published during the war, survived in post-war archives. Among its conclusions, the HVSS provides cross-country ride characteristics markedly superior to all previous Sherman variants. Maintenance procedures are simplified to a degree unparalleled in German designs. The Ford GAA engine combines high specific power with reliability not achieved in domestic units. The gun stabilization system, though limited, increases first-round hit probability during movement. The final paragraph carried a tone almost elegiac. The enemy has achieved through industrial rationalization what we attempted through craftsmanship. His machines lack romance but possess endurance. In the long war, endurance decides. That sentence, understated yet devastating, circulated quietly among German armored engineers during the war's final weeks. For many, it marked the end of a belief that German superiority in design could offset inferiority in numbers. When the Red Army reached Kummersdorf in late April, they found the EZ-8 still parked beside the testing sheds, its engine drained of fuel but otherwise intact. Soviet officers examined it briefly before shipping it east for their own evaluations at Kubinka. There, it would join a growing collection of Western armor that helped shape early Cold War design thinking. Hoffmann, the officer who had first discovered the tank in the Saar Valley, never saw it again. His maintenance detachment was overrun near Fulda in early April. In his post-war debriefing to Allied interrogators, he recalled his impressions of the captured machine. When I first climbed inside, I noticed the seat cushions. Simple canvas over springs. Our tanks had none. Small comfort perhaps, but it told me these Americans thought of their crews as men, not instruments. I think that is why they won. It was a sentiment echoed years later by surviving German engineers interviewed by British historian Kenneth Maxey. They spoke not of firepower or armor but of reliability, the quiet virtue that allowed American units to move when theirs could not. The EZ-8's story did not end with the war. Its HVSS suspension and long-barreled 76mm gun became the standard for post-war exports, serving in Korea, the Middle East, and even training depots well into the 1960s. Yet its most profound impact had already occurred in those last bitter months of the European War, when German officers accustomed to mechanical breakdowns watched an enemy tank glide effortlessly across the mud and realized that mastery had changed meaning. The captured M4A3E8 at Kummersdorf was not merely another specimen in a laboratory. It was the material evidence of a civilization that had learned to turn abundance into precision. For men raised in the culture of the tiger and panther, that realization was shattering and final. April 1945. The Westerwald region of western Germany lay soaked with spring rain. Forest trails had turned to rivers of brown clay that swallowed men and machines alike. For the remnants of Panzer-Lehr-Division, the landscape had become a trap. Fuel deliveries had ceased. Tigers stood hidden under camouflage nets, engines drained to prevent Soviet air attacks from igniting them. A single move might reveal their position to the prowling fighter bombers that ruled the daylight sky. Unteroffizier Karl Mayer, formerly a test driver at Kummersdorf, now commanded a 5-man crew in a Panther Osf. G orders arrived that morning. hold the ridgeline east of Limburg until civilian columns could cross behind them. They were told the Americans advancing through the valleys fielded new Shermans with broader tracks. Meyer remembered the test range demonstrations 2 months earlier and felt an odd unease. He alone among his comrades knew what that description meant. By noon, the sound reached them an unbroken mechanical hum rather than the uneven growl of earlier Shermans. Through binoculars, Meyer saw a column of tanks emerging from the mist. The hulls looked familiar, but the stance was different, lower, wider, balanced. Each track pad bit into the mud without spraying debris, he whispered. Easy 8, using the American nickname he had overheard from captured manuals. His loader frowned. Was the improved Sherman, Meyer said quietly. They have it now. The German gunners opened fire at 800 meters, the usual killing distance. The Panther's high-velocity shell struck the lead Sherman square on the glacis and ricocheted. The angle of impact, altered by the Sherman's revised 47-degree slope and reinforced nose casting, turned the round aside with a shriek of metal. The American tank halted only long enough to traverse its 76mm gun. 2 flashes followed in rapid succession, the second finding the flank of a Panzer IV dug in nearby. Flames erupted from its turret ring. The crew of Meyer's Panther felt the concussion through their armor. He ordered reverse gear, but the track tension jammed in the mud. The Panther weighed nearly 50 tons, even on firm ground. Its power-to-weight ratio was marginal. The Easy 8, 10 tons lighter and riding on the wide T-66 tracks of its HVSS system, advanced steadily. Over the intercom, his gunner shouted, "They are moving while firing. They do not stop." Meyer already knew. He had watched the gyrostabilizer at work back in February. Now he saw it applied in combat, its purpose unmistakable. They fired again at 500 meters. The shell clipped the enemy's mantlet but failed to penetrate. Another burst of 76mm fire answered, and dirt gazered around their position. American artillery joined in, guided by radio from forward observers. Within minutes, the ridge became untenable. Meyer's crew abandoned the Panther, retreating through a drainage ditch toward the rear. From the woods, he turned once more and saw the Easy 8s crest the ridge. Their movement was smooth, almost serene amid the chaos. Later, captured by U.S. forces near Gießen, Meyer told his interrogators, "It was not their armor that frightened us. It was that they kept coming when ours had already stopped." Similar encounters repeated across the collapsing front. Reports from the 11th Panzer-Division and 7th Army describe Sherman units advancing across terrain previously considered impassable for medium tanks. The HVSS suspension, combined with the new duckbill extended end connectors on the tracks, reduced ground pressure to less than 10 pounds per square inch lower than a man's boot print in soft soil. German formations accustomed to choosing defensive positions based on terrain suddenly found no safety in mud or slope. American tanks crossed fields that had bogged down Panthers days earlier. In an after-action report dated April 21st, the commander of Kampfgruppe Gross wrote, "The new American Sherman variant possesses mobility exceeding expectation. Our armored counterattacks are constrained by fuel shortage and terrain, yet the enemy continues through obstacles which immobilize our vehicles. The moral effect upon our crews is significant." The phrase moral effect appeared increasingly in those late-war reports, a euphemism for despair. Behind the front, the implications were being discussed in quieter tones. At Hildesheim, surviving engineers from Maschinenfabrik Augsburg-Nürnberg met under air raid sirens to review field feedback. They compared notes with men evacuated from Kummersdorf before the Soviets arrived. Dr. Rabe, now wearing a worn civilian coat, summarized the consensus. "The suspension design we dismissed as crude has proven decisive. It allows sustained movement without mechanical strain. Our torsion bar system cannot be widened without redesign of the entire hull. Even if we survive, it will take years to adapt." One colleague asked if the design could be copied. Rabe smiled faintly. "We could copy it, but we could not mass-produce it. The Americans built simplicity into their factories before they built it into their tanks." The room fell silent as the sirens rose again. Across the Rhine, American ordnance officers were already compiling their own evaluations. At Ordnance Technical Intelligence Center, Paris, recovered German documents from Kummersdorf were translated and filed under Enemy Interest in Allied Equipment. Major William F. Crandall wrote a summary on May 5, 1945. Captured German engineers show particular interest in the M4A3E8 suspension, calling it the practical limit of spring technology for tracked vehicles. They note its ease of maintenance and its resilience to shock damage, suggest continued development along similar lines for post-war models. That recommendation directly influenced the U.S. Army's next generation, the M26 Pershing, and later the M46 Patton, both of which adopted horizontal spring packs derived from the EZ-8 system. As Germany collapsed, thousands of its surviving tankmen experienced a psychological reversal more profound than any tactical defeat. For years, propaganda had taught them to view Allied equipment as inferior products of an unthinking machine civilization mass over mastery. Yet the war's final weeks revealed that this very industrial rationality had produced not mediocrity but mechanical grace. Interrogation transcripts from Allied prisoner of war, Camp No. 22, Reims, preserve fragments of that realization. One anonymous panzer commander said, "We believed quality was a matter of craftsmanship, of precision fitting by hand. The Americans have shown that quality is repeatability, that 1,000 machines can be as good as one." Another added, "Our tanks were thoroughbreds, theirs were workhorses. But in war, it is the horse that survives." In May 1945, when hostilities ceased, several intact EZ-8s remained in Europe for comparative trials. The British conducted their own tests at Chertsey Proving Ground. Reports confirmed what the Germans had already learned. The HVSS reduced track wear by nearly 40%, extended component life beyond 1,500 miles, and provided a ride smooth enough to fire accurately at 25 miles per hour. One British officer described driving it as like piloting a ship through swell rather than jolting across land. In the same period, Soviet engineers examined the Kubinka specimen. Their assessment focused less on comfort and more on strategic meaning. The Americans have achieved standardization of production unmatched in any other army. The design of suspension and track demonstrates capacity for mass replication and easy field repair. Future Soviet designs should emphasize these qualities. Within 5 years, the T-54 would enter service a tank whose balance between firepower, reliability, and simplicity echoed lessons first drawn from studying the EZ-8. As the post-war world hardened into opposing blocs, many of the captured German documents found new life in Western research laboratories. The Kummersdorf report on the M4A3E8, recovered intact from Soviet archives in the 1990s, remains one of the most revealing testimonies of wartime engineering humility. Its concluding paragraph reads, almost as an epitaph for an era. In future conflicts, success will belong not to the nation that constructs the most powerful single weapon, but to the one that can sustain its weapons longest in the field. The statement could have been written by an American logistics officer, yet it came from men who once built the Tiger. Looking back from the distance of decades, historians see in that moment a turning point of thought rather than technology. The EZ-8 did not possess revolutionary armor or a radical gun. Its achievement lay in integration, the harmony of engine, suspension, and production philosophy. For German officers who had equated complexity with genius, that harmony forced a reckoning. The war had shown that the measure of engineering was not how intricate a machine could become, but how dependably it could serve its human operators under chaos. When Franz Hoffmann's diary was discovered among post-war records, a final entry dated March 29, 1945, offered a quiet confession. "We designed for victory, they designed for endurance. When endurance lasted longer than our faith, the war was already lost." In the closing weeks, as Allied armor rolled unhindered through towns that once built the Panzer, villagers emerged to see tanks unlike the monsters of propaganda. They were unadorned, functional, their crews young and weary, but confident that the engines beneath them would start each morning. Among those machines rumbled dozens of Easy-8s, unremarkable to onlookers. Yet to the defeated engineers watching from the ruins, they represented the final proof that reliability itself had become a weapon. The Germans had seized an American M4A3E8, believing they would learn its secrets and surpass it. Instead, they discovered that the secret was not hidden in any one part or mechanism. It was in the philosophy that bound them together, a belief that perfection lies not in the exceptional, but in the repeatable. And in that realization, amid the mud and ashes of 1945, the age of the Tiger ended, and the age of the Easy-8 began. Summer 1946. The proving grounds of Aberdeen, Maryland were quiet, except for the echo of tracks grinding over gravel. Rows of captured German and Japanese vehicles stood rusting in the sun, their paint fading, their armor scored by test impacts. Among them, one Sherman remained in pristine condition. M4A3E8 No. 30103084. Engineers used it to train a new generation of ordnance officers. Lieutenant Robert H.A. Dean, who had driven an Easy-8 through the Saar, wrote in his logbook, "They tell us to move on to Pershings and Pattons. I keep this one running because it never failed me. It deserves a place beside them." He was not alone in that sentiment. Across Europe, in US occupation zones, hundreds of Easy-8s continued to serve as police and reconnaissance tanks. Mechanics stripped them, rebuilt them, repainted them olive-drab. What began as a promos, wartime expedient had become the durable backbone of a peacetime army. Korea, the proof of concept. When war ignited again in 1950, it was the Easy-8, not the heavier Pershing, that first climbed the Korean hills. In the desperate summer battles around Busan, its low ground pressure and dependable Ford GAA engine proved decisive. Marine Sergeant William Vaughan later told interviewers, "The Koreans called them fire wagons. You could drive one through paddy mud where trucks sank up to their doors. Those old Shermans still had fight in them." Against the early North Korean T-34, 85 seconds, the Easy-8's 76mm gun, firing HVAP rounds, could penetrate at medium range. Crews relied on maneuver, using the same suspension that once impressed German engineers to circle and strike from the flank. By the time the M26 Pershing and M46 Patton arrived, the Sherman had already stabilized the front. The machine conceived in 1944 to counter Panthers had, by endurance alone, become the bulwark of the first war of the Cold Era, the global apprenticeship. In the late 1940 seconds and 1950 seconds, hundreds of surplus Easy-8s travelled further than their designers ever imagined. To France, Israel, Pakistan, Argentina, Chile and Japan, they came as gifts, loans, or purchases under mutual defence pacts. Each nation modified them differently. The French fitted the CN-7550 gun from their new AMX-13, creating the M4A1 revalorisé. The Israelis added diesel engines and smoke dischargers, producing the M50 Super Sherman. The Japanese, now demilitarized but later rearming under American supervision, studied the Easy-8's suspension as the basis for their Type 61 prototype. Everywhere it went, the HVSS layout reappeared, copied, adapted, sometimes improved, but always recognizable. Its principle of horizontally opposed spring units became a quiet standard in armored vehicle design for 2 generations. The German aftermath. Meanwhile, in post-war, West Germany, former Wehrmacht engineers were invited to help rebuild the country's industrial base. Among them was Dr. Franz Hoffmann, once of Kummersdorf. Working at Krauss-Maffei, he contributed to the Leopard 1 project in the early 1960 seconds. Colleagues recalled that Rabe kept an old American technical manual on his desk, a copy of TM 9731, a medium tank M4A3. He often pointed to a page showing the HVSS layout and said, "Half in admiration, half in regret, we learned too late that simplicity is the most complex thing to design." When the Leopard 1 finally entered service, its designers emphasized reliability, ease of maintenance, and mobility, not heavy armor. In many ways, It was a philosophical descendant of the EZ-8 rather than the Tiger. Thus, the lessons first absorbed under duress in 1945 resurfaced in the tanks of the Bundeswehr 2 decades later. Memory in steel. By the 1970 seconds, most EZ-8s had been retired, scrapped, or turned into monuments in town squares across Europe and the United States. Yet a few still moved under their own power in parades. Veterans would rest their hands on the sun-warm armor and tell younger generations that these machines had outlived empires. At the Patton Museum in Fort Knox, one preserved example bears a small plaque quoting an unknown German officer from captured archives. "We built machines for heroes, they built machines for soldiers." Visitors rarely notice the quote's origin, but those who do understand that it embodies the entire contrast of the Second World War, a clash not merely of armies, but of industrial philosophies and definitions of strength. The echo in modern warfare. Modern tanks, Abrams, Leopards, Challengers weigh twice what an EZ-8 did, yet their designers still speak of crew endurance, maintainability, and operational availability. Those phrases are the descendants of a single wartime revelation, that reliability equals combat power. When U.S. armored units deployed to the Persian Gulf in 1991, a few veterans of Korea visited their younger counterparts. One of them, Sergeant Vaughan, now grey-haired, ran his hand along an M1's track and smiled. "Same principle," he said. "Springs inside, road wheels outside, keep her rolling, and she'll bring you home." Half a century separated that machine from his EZ-8, but the lineage was unmistakable. The historian's view. In academic circles, debates over tank superiority often devolve into charts of armor, thickness, and gun caliber. Yet the story of the EZ-8 resists quantification. It reminds historians that warfare is not a contest of blueprints but of systems, human, mechanical, logistical. German chroniclers of the 1950 seconds, compiling the multi-volume Das Hier I Am Kampf, treated the EZ-8 with a respect rare in their assessments of Allied equipment. One passage reads, "Its virtue was consistency. It achieved through modest means what we sought through. Brilliance. Perhaps that is the greater brilliance. The machine that outlasted its era. Today, on quiet weekends, enthusiasts still start EZ-8 engines at reenactments. The Ford GAA growls, the hull trembles, and the same suspension that once impressed and humbled German engineers carries the tank smoothly across grass. Children climb the turret, veterans salute, cameras click. Few realize that beneath the paint and the nostalgia lies a design born from war's most unforgiving lessons, that excellence is endurance, that dependability is courage made mechanical. The EZ-8 was never meant to be legendary. It became so precisely because it did what it was built to do, again and again, without drama. Epilogue: the circle closed. In 1995, at a museum near Koblenz, curators unveiled a new exhibit, Tanks of the Second World War, Adversaries and Inventions. At its center stood two vehicles, a Tiger I and an M4A3E8. Between them, a glass case displayed the original 1945 Kummersdorf report, rescued from Soviet archives. Visitors could read the engineer's concluding sentence, written in fading ink. If we had possessed such reliability, perhaps the outcome would have been prolonged, but not changed. For wars are now won by the side whose machines keep moving. The Tiger behind the glass is silent, its engine long dead. The EZ-8 beside it, restored to running order, is started each anniversary of VE Day. Its engine still catches on the first turn. The Germans once seized an American M4A3E8 to learn its secrets. In the end, the lesson outlived both empires. Power fades, reliability endures. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.